Centurion warsuits were rediscovered in the 36th millennium after the Age of Apostasy. They are used by almost every Space Marine chapter as a sort of mobile infantry tank hybrid, carrying the most powerful weapons available to the Space Marines while not fully investing into something such as a tank. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Centurion Assault Squad of the Space Marines, one of the more recent kits, relatively, in the whole scale of 40k for the Space Marines. The Centurion Assault Squad comes in at 150 points for 3, or 300 points for 6, or 50 points per model, basically. In terms of stats, they move at a absolutely sluggish 4 inches per turn, which is almost immobile. Their toughness 7, they have a 2+ save with 4 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 2. They unfortunately aren't very resilient to many types of weapons, just given the fact that toughness 7 isn't that useful and makes them very vulnerable to things like plasma guns, but overall their stat line isn't atrocious, it's just very slow. In terms of ranged weapons, their Centurion bolters are rapid fire 3, twin linked, 3 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. This is actually a pretty solid anti-horde weapon, which is useful for these guys as they don't want to be bogged down by chaff in melee. They also come standard with Twin Flamers, which are Ignore Cover, Twin Linked and Torrent, D6 attacks that auto-hit at 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Very solid, again, anti-horde clearing. Or they can swap them out for Twin Melt-A-Guns, which are Melt-A 2, Twin Linked, 1 attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 9, AP 4, and damage D6. Overall, I think this is a fine option, though I'd usually bring the Flamers just to clear out anything like Gretchen that might get in their way. Their melee weapons are Siege Drills, which have 3 attacks that hit on 3s, strength 10, AP 2, and damage 3. Really good against every kind of infantry. And certain vehicles. And in terms of abilities, their main one is Annihilator Protocols. Melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have sustained hits 2 when targeting monsters, vehicles, or fortifications, which makes them really effective against them, unsurprisingly. And then Centurion Assault Launcher gives the bearer the grenades keyword, which is something that they have to swap out their bolters for, which we'll cover in the loadout section. Overall, their ability is quite solid, and they do quite a lot of melee damage, though they aren't very durable, so they definitely need aid in getting to where they need to be without being blown up. Every model is equipped with Twin Flamers, Centurion Bolters, and Siege Drills. Then, any number of models can replace their Centurion Bolters for a Grenade Launcher, or the Centurion Assault Launcher, and any number of models can replace their Twin Flamers with Twin Melt-A-Guns. Overall, I would generally probably just keep them stock, maybe swap out one for the grenades if you're running a big squad, but the Centurion Bolters will be very efficient at dealing with things like Gretchen or medium or low toughness infantry that these guys really don't want to bother fighting in melee. And the Flamers aid in that as well, though the Melt-A-Guns do give them a little extra anti-armor damage, but I think they do enough of that in melee that they don't really need the extra help with how swingy it is with the Melt-A-Weapons. Overall, I again will just keep them standard, but if you are running a big squad, I would probably swap one out for grenades, just to really make sure they clear out any infantry that get in their way that they don't want to be chopping up, like Terminators, for example. In terms of buff options, they have no leaders, but I did include the things that can provide buffs to them, though I may have missed a few, just because they're either not super relevant to them, or they don't really offer them anything. Uriel Ventress is definitely the one people know the most. He can give these guys Deep Strike, which helps them just because they're so innately slow. Rapid Ingress is very good on them. Definitely one of the biggest threats that can be given that is these guys, and can be super punishing to the enemy if they leave any space where these guys can drop, because truly their melee damage is really good. It will put the hurt on just about anything, from the lightest vehicles to things like Terminators. Though it won't do much against hordes, but that's why you have all the bolters and flamers. Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves is another one that I think is quite nice for them, just to give them those free reroll charges and reroll hit rolls, which is very useful given their low number of attacks. And then in terms of transports, the Land Raiders come to mind with their assault ramps, and they desperately need something to make them move faster, and the Land Raider is super tough and will allow them to get to combat much quicker if you don't want to use something like Uriel Ventress. And then there's also the Storm Raven, which can do the same thing but worse, but I did want to at least include the Storm Raven, mainly because I really like the Storm Raven. It's one of my favorite Space Marine vehicles, and I love to use it in just about every game that I play, honestly. It's really fun to transport very dangerous things in a plane. In terms of detachment options, in Gladius, they of course enjoy the advance and charge. They can use the reactive movement stratagem, which is useful just given how slow they are. And of course, if you want them to punch something to death extra hard, Honor the Chapter is really good on them. Anvil is definitely more of a shooting army, and if I was including something to bring melee muscle to the army, I don't think these guys would do it just because they need a good amount of the army dedicated to getting them to melee, where you'd probably want something more like Assault Intercessors or Blade Guard Veterans in something like Anvil, just to have cheap melee that's very good. In terms of Ironstorm, the reroll could be useful if you're bringing Melta-Guns, but I say it isn't very useful in general, and they're way too pricey and fragile to act as a melee screen. I don't think they have a lot of use here in Ironstorm. Firestorm gives them the Assault keyword, which is really useful in those weapons, and Twin-Linked Flamers is an option if you want to use the Devastating Wounds. Advance and Charge is good from Stormlance. First Company sucks. Vanguard allows them to Deep Strike, and then they can drop in and pop out when they get in danger with the Return to Reserve stratagem. Unforgiven doesn't give them anything specific, and Ravenwing already has speed and melee, so having these guys doesn't add much to that detachment, in my personal opinion. Deathwing is a force that tends to rely on slow-moving units with Deep Strike, so it's kind of pointless to include this unit that does that, but requires more investment. Righteous Crusaders, I think, is actually a solid enough place for them. They really appreciate all the melee buffs, and the Feel No Pain won't make them necessarily tough, but it does make it so they're not quite as squishy. Champions of Russ is honestly kind of the same thing as the Righteous Crusaders for the most part, and is very similar in that way. In terms of Liberator Assault Group, I think they're actually quite deadly there. They make good targets for stratagems like Savage Echoes, and the +2 strength and attacks makes them much more deadly against Toughness 12 vehicles, which could give them a little bit of trouble. But with that, of course, they are just going to be absolutely nuking enemy units. Lost Brethren, they don't get the buffs there, and it's a speed melee detachment. They really don't have a place there. And honestly, similar with Angelic Host, they're all about deep striking and redeploying, and I don't think these guys really have a place there because there won't be anything to draw fire away from them, which will just lead them to die. In terms of competitors, Terminators definitely come to mind as a more mobile version of these guys, and also far more durable. Centurions can, in certain situations, outdamage them, but the volume of attacks that Terminators get over these guys definitely evens things out quite a bit. I do think with Uriel Ventress, these guys can outperform Terminators in a few areas, but in general, I prefer Terminators, not only just because I like Terminators more as a unit, but just because I think they're a little bit more flexible. Aggressors are honestly really similar to Centurions. They're bulky Space Marines that have good melee and good anti-infantry shooting. Though the Aggressors definitely do need that character to be worth it. Aggressors can foot slog. They don't necessarily want to do it, but they really can do it, where these guys really can't. They're way too slow, way too fragile, way too big. They're pretty much the same thing, but just if you want to use them in different ways, I guess is how I would describe them. Assault Centurions are very much just glass melee cannons. Their weapons are most weapons will kill them pretty well, so you can't really rely on them weathering the storm till they get to melee, and there's not enough of them for it to work. Their siege drills, though, are really apocalyptic melee, especially against vehicles and monsters, which they will turn into mincemeat very quickly, especially 3+ save vehicles, which they just absolutely chew through in no time at all. I think Uriel's Deep Strike does make them way better, which does limit their use in certain chapter-specific places, but I think they could still have a place jumping out of a Land Raider, even though General Uriel is definitely better for that role. Just because if you have that risk of these guys appearing anywhere on the board, it forces your enemy to really think, because if they make one mistake, these guys can destroy a lot of targets in just one round of melee, whether it's a vehicle, elite infantry, whatever it may be. These guys can jump out from Deep Strike and just grind something to pieces with their drills before jumping back to safety and starting the whole thing over again. They're definitely not my favorite, but they're definitely powerful. You have to respect them or you're going to get drilled. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.